Well, howdy YouTube, Unky Joe here, Unky Joe's Playhouse. Today, we're going to cover Proxmox, something we haven't covered in well over a year. So, yeah, what's there to say? I guess the meat is in the potatoes? It's not what people say. The proof is in the pudding. Meat in the potatoes. You can tell I'm hungry, huh? I'm always hungry. Anyway, Proxmox video. Let's get the video started right now. Alright, so let's go over the specs of this machine that is running Proxmox. This is a super micro motherboard. It's an 8X SIL-F motherboard. I hope I got that model number correct. So basically it's a, the F is the denominator for the fact that it has built-in KVM chip on there. I bought this board, what, a year ago, a year and a half ago, something like that. It has a Xeon X3470 CPU. It's a 4-core, 8-thread model Xeon. 16 gig of RAM. I have a 500 gig spinning hard drive in there. It has dual built-on NICs. It's in a 2U case, and like I said, it's running an 8X SIL-F motherboard from Supermicro. The version of Proxmox that I'm running is 6.2-4. with no updates. I've got 3 VMs installed on there. There's a Windows 10 Pro running version 1909 with all the updates, and Windows Server 2019 with a desktop environment and the updates. And then I'm also running a copy of CentOS 7. Alright, so let's go over the view that you get with Proxmox. So if we come up here to the data center view and come here to summary, you'll get a health summary, a guest summary, LXC of the virtual machines and the LXC containers. And you can see I've got 3 VMs running and one of them stopped. It tells you the amount of CPU, memory, and storage in use. I don't have any subscriptions, so it's not going to show them. And then it shows my nodes. So if I had more than one Proxmox machine, it would show up here as Proxmox 2, 3, or whatever I labeled it as. So you can come up here and let's see. Let's go to summary. So we're not using cluster or Ceph. You can come here to options. You can change some of your options like your keyboard layout, your console view, your email address, your MAC prefix, etc. Storage. These were created automatically for me when I installed Proxmox, and one of them is designed to be for your backup files, your ISO images, and your container templates. It creates it for you automatically, and it created a local LVM for the disk images for the virtual machine, so just be aware of that. And it's at this point here under the data center view that you could actually add additional storage, which we're going to do here in a minute. You have backup here, replication. You can set up permissions based on users, API tokens. These are advanced functions that I'm honestly not familiar with, but they are there. But it can be a bit confusing. You would think that you would come under Proxmox and then come under disks, and here is where you would do your storage, but that's not the case. In fact, you have to come up to data center, go to storage, and then you can add any number of storage devices on here. As you can see, you've got NFS, CIFS, iSCSI, CFFS, RBD, ZFS over iSCSI, and ZFS. So even if you don't have a FreeNAS unit or something running ZFS, ZFS is built into Proxmox. Well, I won't say ZFS itself. They have the modules that you need to run a ZFS file system. So you could do that. If I had multiple drives in this server, which I don't, I could then in theory set up a ZFS array on these local drives. But the other thing is I could also do ZFS over iSCSI. So that's an advanced topic I'm not going to get into today. I am going to, however, show you how to set up, how I've got a NFS share set up. So let me do that right now. So over on my Synology flash station, the FS1018, I have an NFS share setup here. So if I were to go out and edit it and come here to NFS permissions, what I've done is I've added the IP address of my Proxmox server, which is 5.9, and I've given it read-write capability. I just went with the defaults on the Synology NAS. And the particular part to pay attention to is the volume mount path, which is /volume1/NFS, and the IP address, which is 5.17. So if I come over here to Proxmox, I can add, click on add. Now keep in mind I'm under the data center view and I'm going to storage, and I can go to add NFS, and then we'll just call this the FS 1018, and the server is going to be 192.168.5.17. Now the export is, I should be able to click on this, volume 1 NFS. It sees it, and this is going to contain disk images. I can select ISO, container, but it's one or the other. You can't do multiple, so I'm just going to choose disk images. Let's see here, the NFS version, I'll leave it default. I'll enable it. Let's go ahead and click on add, and it looks like it has worked. So now I have that as a storage volume available to me. So if I come up out on the FS 1018 right here on Proxmox 1, go to content, you can see I've already got a couple of virtual machine disks in there that I'm actually not using anymore. I wonder if I can delete these. These are from a previous install, so all I have to do is, it looks like highlight it, click on remove. Nope, you cannot delete it. Okay, so I'll have to actually go out on the Synology and delete those images. So let me go back to my Synology real quick, and let me go out to that file station, to NFS, images, and there's 100 and 102. I'm just going to delete those, get rid of them. Now it's actually going to put them under the recycle bin under images, so I can go ahead and delete that folder as well. Alright, so they're gone. So now, when I come here to the FS 1018, they should be empty. So that's fairly trivial. Now, the next thing is you're probably wondering is, how do I upload an ISO? Well, it's very simple. You just come over to that local share that Proxmox created for you, and you can see I've already got some ISOs here. You basically just select upload, tell it it's an ISO image, go to select file, and then pick out wherever you have your ISO images. For example, I've got mine on my Synology NAS under ISO, and let's just let's upload. Let's do Debian. We'll send a Debian upload to it. Click on open, click on upload, and then it happens fairly quickly. So as you can see, not much to it. You just have to remember that you have to keep your local is for your ISOs, and your local LVM is any storage that you have that was allocated during the install of Proxmox. So it does that automatically. Now, while the Proxmox interface it's okay, it could be much better. Actually, I prefer over Proxmox's interface. I mean, I know it's not intuitive, let's put it that way. You have to go out and learn some stuff on how this interface works. I do prefer XCP and Hyper-V's interface to this, but it is functional. It is, however, written in Java, so be aware of that. So on your summary page, you get your CPU usage, memory usage, server load. You can check your package versions here, but I don't have a valid subscription, so it keeps reminding me of that all the time. Now, I also haven't updated Proxmox. It's been my experience in the past. If you don't have a subscription and you try to do the workaround for community updates for Proxmox, you risk hosing your server. At least when I tested it over a year ago, that was the problem I had. So I would recommend you getting a valid subscription if you're going to use Proxmox in your lab or whatever. It's fairly inexpensive. We'll cover the cost of that at the end of this video. But let's go over the interface. So you've got a place to put in notes. You can go out and get a shell command, and you can run, various different Linux commands in there. For example, I'm just running top just to give you an idea of what you can do under the shell. Now, under system, it lists the processes that are running. I'm assuming that's what it is. And then under network, you really, I've got 2 network cards in here, but you notice something it doesn't tell you. Even if you go to edit, it doesn't tell you what kind of network card it is, the brand, the manufacturer. I assume you can change the MTU units. Yes, you can. You can put in an IPv4, but keep in mind it's bridged this connection. It's created a Linux bridge called VMBR01 or 0, and that's the one that actually has my IP address and my gateway in there. But as far as editing any of the settings of the card or updating drivers or whatever, keep in mind this is not Windows. This is a Linux-based hypervisor, so it's really limited as what you can do. Certificates, so these are the certificates it comes installed with. I'm not going to cover certs because I'm not knowledgeable enough about them to, especially under Proxmox, to teach you anything. You have your DNS server here, your host names, time, your syslog. If you had a subscription, this is where your updates would be. You've got it does have a built-in firewall. I've never used it, but it is built in. And then as far as your disks go, you could go and see what hard disks are in there. As you can see, I have a single hard drive, Dev SDA. It is a spinning Rust hard drive. It's a Western Digital 500 gig. And then my LVM, Logical Volume Managed Share, it created that by default when I installed Proxmox. So it shows you the size and what's in use. Then LVM Thin, which is my data directory, and it thin provisions it. I do like that function. By default, it installs your hard drives as thin provision drives, so that's good. If you had any shared directories, it'd be in there. Any ZFS, it would be in there. Then your Ceph, configuration, replication, task history, and then any subscriptions I have. So I mainly keep it in the summary view. Again, it's not an intuitive interface, but it is functional, and it does tell you the basic stuff you need. I would, however, like a little more control over the peripherals that are inside the unit from the operating system or from the core of the hypervisor, but you're going to have to go to the command line to do things like that. Now, I've created some virtual machines on here, and I've got a couple of Windows 10 test machines. There's this machine here, which is not powered up. I have this unit here, which is powered up. And if you go to the summary view on there, it will tell you that the guest editions are installed and all the I/O drivers are installed. Same way with Server 2019. I'm sorry, yeah, that was Server 2019. Then here's my Windows 10 test, and it does have the guest editions installed. Now, this CentOS install is a basic non-graphical install. It's just added a waiting out there at a command prompt for me, as you can see. I haven't gotten to where I've installed the guest agent or the drivers for Proxmox under Linux because I haven't studied them yet. But I know it can be done. But what I want to focus on talking about are the main kind of operating systems I'll be using are Windows 10 and Windows Server in a virtual environment. It's very seldom I use Linux, and hardly ever I use a Linux desktop in a virtual environment. And there are some things you need to be aware of when installing Windows 10, and for that matter, Windows Server 2019. And let's talk about those next. Now, here's where things can get a little confusing. I checked both Proxmox's wiki page, and I went to the Idiot's Install, John Spragan's blog on how to install Windows 10 under Proxmox. And I'm going to tell you, I had nothing but trouble following these instructions. And I'm going to try and explain it as clearly as I can. So according to John's instructions and also Proxmox's very own instructions, they tell you, and I quote, on how to configure the machine. So it tells you to create a guest OS and enable the QEMU agent in the System tab. Continue and mount your Windows 10 ISO in the CD-ROM drive. Now it tells you for your virtual hard disk, select SCSI as bus with VirtIO SCSI as controller, and set write back as cache option for best performance. No cache default is safer but slower, and tick discard to optimally use the disk space trim. Okay, and then it tells you to configure your memory as needed, and then also for the VirtIO drivers, use the stable VirtIO, which I did. I got the most recent stable version. And to set it up this way also, it tells you to set up your network controller to use the VirtIO controller. Let me show you what they're talking about. So I did just that. I set up a BIOS as a default. The machine is an i440FX. I set up an VirtIO SCSI controller. And then my hard drive was also VirtIO, all right, local LVM, right there. And then I added my ISO image right here, and the VirtISO image here. And then I also set up the network device as a virtual IO para-virtualized network controller. Let me just show you the VirtIO controller for Windows 10. And the disk is VirtIO local LVM with write back cache. That's all fine and dandy. However, when you do that, and you come up here and you enable the QEMU guest agent, after you've installed Windows 10, this is my understanding, then you're supposed to come and install your VirtIO drivers, right? I did that. The one thing it never did when I set up the hardware as per the best practices guide, and even by John Spraggon's Idiot's Guide, you can see he's got the same thing here. You set it up as a VirtIO with write back cache. Anytime I did that and then tried to go into Windows 10, it would give me a black screen. It would show the initial boot up screen and give me a black screen. Now, it only did that after I turned on the QEMU guest agent. So, if I were to go ahead and bring this, I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. So I'll go ahead and start this virtual machine, and we'll let it boot up into Windows. Now, it took me a good day to figure this out through trial and error and experimentation. And every guide I checked on installing Windows 10 as a virtual machine under Proxmox had the same flawed instructions. And I verified it not only in this Proxmox machine, but I put it on another machine that was running Proxmox, and I had the same problem. That's how I was able to recreate it. Alright, so it's booted up to Windows 10 and it is running, but as you can see, no guest agent is configured. Now, if I come over to my other Windows 10 machine, you'll see the guest agent is configured. And if we were to log into this virtual machine, the one that is working with the guest agent, alright, and on the one that is working, I want to bring up Device Manager. Now, keep in mind, under my options, I have this set up as, let's go under Hardware. I have a VirtIO SCSI controller, but I'm using a SATA drive with no cache, right? And I'm using a Intel E1000 network card. No big deal, right? It should still work, and it does. But if you look under the Device Manager, when I go with the non-standard setup for Windows 10 virtual machine under Proxmox, i.e. not following their best practices, once I install all the VirtIO drivers and then flip the switch and tell it to use the QEMU agent, so let's come here to System Devices, and what you're going to see here is a VirtIO serial driver, okay? So if I don't follow the best practices and set it up just the way you saw I did with hardware, and then enable the guest agent, I get a prompt under Windows to install a driver for the VirtIO serial driver. However, if I set up this Windows 10 machine using these hardware options, which is the ones the book says, you know, are the best practices, the VirtIO SCSI and a VirtIO driver and the VirtIO driver for the network card, and then I then come to options and enable the QEMU guest agent, Windows 10 locks, and I can never get to the point where I could even install that VirtIO storage driver. So I'm going to go ahead and log on and show you. I've even tried to install this driver manually, you know, to force it. There is a way to force drivers under Windows 10. So this is the one I installed using best practices, and if you come under system devices, you'll see there is no VirtIO serial driver. And even though I've attempted to force it to install, it has not installed. So let me go ahead and shut this machine down. And then we'll enable the QEMU, and I'll show you what it is I'm talking about. I do like the little console screen. And it does take a minute to register that a virtual machine is actually down. There we go. Wait for this green arrow to go out. So we'll come back down here to options, and we'll enable the QEMU guest agent, tell it OK. And then we'll come back up to console and we'll go ahead and try to start the machine. And it'll come to the splash screen, show you it's booting, and then what'll happen is the screen will go black. Watch it make a liar out of me. I doubt it. I've done this repeatedly. You'll get this black screen, and if you come under summary, you'll see that your memory usage is pegged at about 80–90%, and it just sits there. And you can let it sit there for hours, and that screen will never change. So what you'll have to do then is you have to right-click on the unit and choose stop, force it to stop. So you need to be aware that if you're going to follow the best practices, or even the idiot installs Windows 10, you're not going to want to use the VirtIO network or the VirtIO hard drive to install, or you're going to run into that problem I did. And like I said, I verified it on not only one but two individual Proxmox machines. So just be aware of that. So that's the way I installed Windows 10 and Windows Server 2019. I followed my own instincts rather than following the best practices. And you'll notice that I've got my CPU usage, memory usage, network traffic, even disk I/O on both machines. So, and the VirtIO drivers are loaded, and I am able to see the information from the guest agent. So if I were to click on more, I get the sudo MAC address, and then I get the IP address and the IPv6 address, etc. So all that's working, even without the VirtIO drivers being installed for the hard drive and for the network card. So I happen to have a 500 gig hard drive laying around, so I put it in the unit just to make things easy. But supposedly this is easy enough to move and migrate your storage to shared storage, and we set up the FS 1018 NFS share. Now what I'll be curious to see is if I can actually move this while it's running. So if I come here to hardware, I don't know if I can. It says I can move the disk. So let's do this with CentOS 7 rather than my Windows machine, because this is a smaller hard drive. So I'm going to come here under the view under Proxmox, go to hardware, and I'm going to go to move disk, and I'm going to try and move that from local LVM to the FS 1018. Now it's going to format it as a QCOW2 format rather than RAW. And I'm going to tell it to go ahead. I'm going to tell it to delete the source. Now, we better not take any chances. I'm just going to tell it at this point to move the disk. And then let's see what happens. So it looks like it is actually moving this over to shared storage. And so I'll let this run, and then I'll continue the video when it's completed. All right, so we're coming into the home stretch now, and you can see that it has completed and moved the drive over to shared storage. So now if we come back over to the virtual machine, you'll see now that we have the hard disk is located on FS1018. It's a QCOW2 disk size, 32 gig. And there's the unused original disk. So it did all this while CentOS was running, and as you can see, if I come back here to the console, I still have the ability to log in. The virtual machine is still running. If I hit enter, you can see it responds. So that is a nice feature of Proxmox, to be able to move virtual machine while it's running. I can come back under here to any of these items under hardware, and I can change them, and it does have CPU flags, so you've got quite a bit of flexibility on setting your CPUs. Same way with your BIOS, you could change that to CBIOS, OVMF, or UEFI, and the default CBIOS. I don't know enough about them to tell you how they work, so you would have to do that on your own. Your display, same way. If I had an internal graphics card like a VirtIO, I could pass through a VirtIO GPU. I don't have a graphics card in here. The machine type, you've got some choices between Q35 and i440FX. You already saw the SCSI controller in the hard disk, so you can come out and you can edit any of these after the fact, change them, modify them to your little heart's content. Come back up to the console, to the summary. So what I'd like to do is go ahead and move my hard drive for this machine as well. So let's come here to hardware, and let's go to our hard disk right here, and it's a 40 gig virtual hard drive. And I'm going to go ahead and move it as well. Let's see if we can do it while it's running. I'm going to move it to the flash station. It's going to be a QEMU image format QCOW2. I'm going to delete the source this time. Hopefully that isn't a mistake. We'll go ahead and choose Move Disk, and it's going to start moving that disk while the virtual machine is running. So we'll take a break here, and we'll come back when that is completed. There we go. Looks like it was successful. Does it say how long it took? No, it just says task okay. So it started at 14:27 and ended at 14:34 hours, so not too bad. And you'll see we don't have a spare extra hard drive now. So if we come up to the console, let's just see if it's still running. And we'll just verify that by logging in real quick. So it didn't even need to bring down the VM for it to transfer the hard drive. So that's a feather in Proxmox cap, because that's one of the things I really like about Hyper-V, is you're able to do all that without having to shut down the virtual machine. So yeah, all is good, and it now has this stored over on our flash station. So there's a virtual machine 103 QCOW disk 0, and here's a VM 101, which is the Windows Server 2019, moved over to the flash station. And it still has a copy of the CentOS image over here in RAW format, so win-win. So there you go. Even an old guy like me was able to get Proxmox set up and running, and I've spent maybe 2 or 3 days on this task. And in fact, it's that unit right behind me on the bench. You can see it's right behind the display, or the portable monitor there on the tripod. That's the unit I'm running it on. So What do I like about Proxmox? Well, it's free and open source. It seems to be very stable. Keep in mind the last version of Proxmox I ran was version 5 over a year ago. I've got some videos out on my channel about it if you look up Proxmox. So this version seems very stable, whereas version 5 I was always a little worried it was going to crash. In fact, after doing the non-subscription updates, in other words, the non-commercial updates, I was able to crash my Proxmox, so that's what kind of put a bad taste in my mouth. It seems fairly responsive, even with old spinning rust hard drive in there. The interface is not real hard to understand. You just got to get used to a new way of doing things. It's got a clean layout, and it's got fairly decent console integration, so that you don't have to jump out to an SSH shell. Or to an SSH session just to do some stuff with the command line. It's fairly easy to set up. It has failover and clustering are built into it, so that's a big plus. Usually pay a pretty premium price for that. It runs on pretty much any hardware you can throw at it. Let's talk about the subscription prices real quick, because they do have a subscription model. And so they have the premium, standard, basic, and community. So if you didn't want to use the community updates, there is a workaround for that by just modifying the repositories under Linux. You can get by without paying them anything, but I think being as they make such a good product, you should at least buy into their community updates. That gives you the access to the enterprise repository. You get all the features, and you get community support. And it's $85 a year and CPU socket. So if you have more than one CPU, double, triple, or quadruple that price. And then from then on, it gets a little pricey. And those are mainly for using it in a business environment, because you're going to want really good support if something goes wrong on that. Now, one of the other things you can do is you can run LXC containers, and there is a way to run Docker containers on Proxmox. So if you're more of a container kind of person, and I recommend Docker, not Doctor. I recommend Docker over LXC. That seems to be the big deal these days, is Docker containers are better than LXC. I got backup and restore built into it. You can restore and migrate your VMs. You can do live storage migration. I showed you that in the demo here. Import and export of VMs. And it's based on Debian is the underlying OS. So if you're familiar with Linux, you've got that going for you. Now, some of the things I don't like. I don't like... Look, everybody knows I'm a Windows fanboy. Well, I wouldn't say fanboy, but a Windows fan. I like the idea of having an operating system underneath my hypervisor that I can do other things with. The machines today are just so powerful. I mean, if you want to just dedicate them to a hypervisor for a level 1 hypervisor, that's fine. But I like my equipment to be able to do multiple things. I want to get what I'm paying for out of it. But there is no way through Proxmox to modify your network adapters and other settings and tweak little settings under Windows like you can under Windows. So you need to be aware that it's a different way that they do things. It will require you to get into the command line and modify some files to do updates without a subscription. It can be done though. Again, the command line is required to do even basic tasks like monitoring and that kind of thing. They don't have a real good monitoring utility in there, Updates are difficult without a subscription. Keep that in mind. And sometimes they can crash the system. And the install and configuration for Windows VMs, you'll get conflicting information out there. I find it's a little kludgy to put a Windows VM on there. So the problem with me is I don't have a use case for this. Like I say, I deal mainly with Windows workstations. I very seldom deal with Linux. If I do, it's as a server, either a file server, web server, that kind of thing. So I don't deal with Windows or Linux workstations like I do with Windows workstations. So I find that the XCP interface is a little more intuitive than this one. If I were to compare this to XCP, I'd say they run about the same. with this one having a better way to set up Windows machines than XCP, because keep in mind with XCP, if you're going to load all the drivers for XCP, because of the fact that Citrix still has say-so over part of that whole kerfuffle there, it's a little hard to get guest agents installed without having the Zen Orchestra installed in order to get the updates done, so keep that in mind. And, you know, why can't all these functions be done through a GUI? It's just, look, I understand the command line, the power behind it. Even Windows has a command line PowerShell, and it's very powerful. But most of the stuff that people need to do can be done through a GUI. And again, I don't need to be typing these commands in all day. It just adds an error point in there for you young folks that have been typing. I've been typing for 40 years, but I have some dexterity issues and some nerve damage in my hands. So the less I type, the better. So I'm a point and click kind of guy, but you know, if you're into the command line, great. But and I will tell you that even though their interface is nicely laid out, it does not have a modern kind of Acme feel to it. You know what I'm saying? You can tell it's Java based, but it was fairly reliable and fairly responsive. You know, I didn't have any major problems with Proxmox other than getting Windows to load the agent tools, and I told you what I did to overcome that. So all in all, I'm pleased with Proxmox. I just don't have a use case for it at Unky Joe's Playhouse. It was nice to play with. It was kind of fun getting my feet wet in it again and remembering all the things that I'd forgotten from a year ago. So there you go, YouTube. I promised a Proxmox video. I've done it, and I won't be coming back to visit it for a while. So hopefully you found the video entertaining and informative. As always, please give us a thumbs up down below if you liked it. Subscribe if you're not already a subscriber. Leave your comments in the comments section. If you're so inclined to donate, we take PayPal and we take Patreon. And a shout out to all my Patreon supporters. Thank you all. Because of your generous donations, we've been able to get a piece of hardware in here. With the current shipping delays and everything, it's probably going to be end of the month to first of next month before it gets here. Today is June 11th, so I'm not seeing this getting to me before the end of the month. If it does, great. But I'll be doing a video on it. I was able to purchase a piece of hardware that I've been waiting to pull the trigger on. So again, your donations make that possible, and I want you to know I greatly appreciate them. So please come back and see us again, and don't forget, we will see you on the other side.